Today I'm with IBM's Senior Enterprise Strategy Manager, Gana Alampalle, who joins me now from London. Gana, I know you're busy, so thank you for agreeing to this chat. Can we start with you telling us a little bit more about yourself and your role at IBM?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me, Jay. My name's Gana. I'm a senior manager within IBM Consulting's enterprise strategy team here in the UK. And I've been advising clients over the last 10 years, predominantly in financial services. During that time, I've worked and advised everyone from small startups in Western Europe all the way through to multi-regional and international banks in the Far East. And I've had the pleasure of working and understanding the different ecosystem models in those regions, as well as the opportunities and challenges they bring, essentially, for both the banks and the consumers at the heart of it.
So what was your starting point of working with IBM?
So me, it was coming in 10 years ago, working really on mission critical projects and programs where banks and large enterprises were essentially doing complex system and integration projects, ensuring a lot of the data that they hold in silos
Yeah.
are more centralized and they can have a better, single view of the customer. And that's really where I saw the value of, I think, data bringing insights and how important this is for an ecosystem and an enterprise to thrive.
It's actually interesting you should mention platform ecosystems. It was only a couple of days ago that I read a white paper titled The Attention Economy, where it revealed that digital platform ecosystems have led to the creation of the most profitable companies in history, which was quite a claim. But I also found that the data behind that statement more interesting, mainly based on recent conversations that I've had with many B2Bs and B2Cs, that there's some confusion between platforms and ecosystems. Have you found that in the businesses that you've worked with? And what are your comments about the profitability of platform ecosystems?
Yeah, sure. That's a really great set of points. So if I start with the profitability side, I think I'm not surprised with that statement, if I'm truly honest. I think as platforms build and ecosystems on top of platforms build, the amount of data, the insight, and the level of customer stickiness that
Yeah.
comes with that platform, and I'll touch on that later, builds it more and more essentially. I think the big elephant in the room when we talk about successful ecosystems is one like Apple, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
Apple historically, and they still continue to thrive in this amazing ecosystem model that they've built over the last decade and more, essentially. In terms of profitability, they essentially skim about 30% of all revenue that participants in the ecosystem make. So, there is a big capex essentially to bring this ecosystem to life. But once it's up, it's just about keeping it in terms of maintainability over a period of time. And on the second point around platforms and ecosystems, yeah, I totally agree. There's a lot of interchangeability when the term platform and ecosystem are used. Sure, a platform is essentially something that helps reduce friction between transactions of different entities.
Yeah.
So think of it again like Apple's App Store. So, that transaction between B to C is reduced greatly because the customer can essentially access one thing and they only need one Apple ID to log in. The ecosystem is essentially something a bit more intrinsic, something that connects different companies and entities together, whether that be products or services, essentially. And that's, very, I think, different to the underlying asset that brings together a platform.
Yeah, I think that's a really good explanation. And of course, with recent news over the past couple of months, I think it's quite timely to discuss Elon Musk's recent reveal of his vision to become the biggest financial institution of the world with X.com. And he's mentioned WeChat, China's WeChat. But I was also reading recently about the difficulties that he faces. And I'd be curious to hear more about your thoughts on that, because I've read that more than a third of consumers say that they don't trust digital banks. 30, I think it was 36, 37% of consumers are saying that they want the ability to still access physical stores. What are your thoughts on Musk's vision for X.com? And also, have you kind of experienced the same level of friction that you've seen in that transition to digital banking ecosystems?
So Elon's, I guess, ambitions for X are, as they are, very ambitious, and he's got some big, hairy goals. It is going to be tricky because where banking ecosystems are in the right now is a very different place to where WeChat was when they first started up. I mean, if you look at WeChat's market, they didn't have those verticals already in place. So we didn't have Airbnb for houses or Ubers for cars in that market compared to all of those players already being established in the US and Europe at that point. I think that's where WeChat really found an opportunity to go, how can we make these type of services and products more accessible to the kind of Asian market? Where Elon's environment is, those apps, those vertical players are already established. So actually bringing users away from all of these products and services is going to be a very different ask when it comes to X.com's proposition, essentially.
And also, I imagine working with the states as well, given each state has their own set of sub bylaws. I imagine trying to navigate that must be an absolute nightmare.
Absolutely. And even beyond the states, if you look at his views and his ambitions, he'll run up against a lot of issues when he goes into markets like Europe, where they've got a lot more stringent data and privacy kind of regulation.
Yeah, of course. So the I guess the other point that we talked about that I raised a minute ago was regarding the friction from the digital banking sector as well as you've got, and I imagine that will maybe shift as time moves forward, as people become more and more accepting to digital banking and digital ecosystems. What have you found from many recent conversations? Is there a problem?
Yeah, so I agree. There's a lot of friction in the market when it comes to people's risk aversion to giving data to banks in exchange for products and services. Not just banks, but generally with other companies as well. And it really differs between different markets across the globe. So, for example, if you look at the population in India, they're a lot happier in general relative to other markets to exchange personal data for goods and services. Whereas in Europe, that's increasingly becoming a friction. So I think banks, as well as other kind of non-banking companies, need to find better, more intuitive ways to provide value while this exchange continues, essentially.
Do you have any information about the US in terms of how it's dealing with the same things that the EU and you mentioned India was dealing with public data?
So with the US, it's what I'd say it's a bit more, less mature than in terms of data and privacy laws than Europe and the Far East. So they're essentially still experimenting, seeing what goes right and what goes wrong, and then laws are essentially reacting and making sure
Because there was an
things.
equivalent, I think the equivalent to the GDPR was this, is it CPPA? I can't remember the actual acronym, but was it just California that have implemented something similar? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's very fragmented. So yeah, you see, California and some of the states in the East Coast as well,
Yeah,
really starting to be fast followers to GDPR and
yeah,
what, Europe is starting to implement or continue to implement, really.
yeah,
But then you have pockets of, states in the middle who are
yeah,
still playing catch up. So actually, as an organization thriving in a country like the US, then becomes a struggle. Do you essentially stay consistent and be as stringent as the more mature states like California, or
yeah.
do you have a very fragmented data and policy standards across the
Which takes
US?
us full loop back to Elon and his problems.
Exactly.
Excellent. So I think my next question, which is an important one to me, which is where do you see this going? What does the future of digital banking ecosystems look like from your perspective?
So what we've seen over the last decade or so is banking really reorganizing themselves to be around certain life moments within the customer journey. So, what does the home buying proposition look like for a customer? What does a car buying proposition look like for a customer? So, for example, if I look at a purely financial services ecosystem proposition around home buying, you've got the actual mortgage, you've got the home insurance, you might have other kind of maintenance insurances around the actual buying process itself.
Of course, yeah.
Uh, what I foresee, you know, happening, and it's already happening now in the next decade, is if you look at that home buying experience, how can I add more layers of the value chain into that experience, which includes financial and non-financial products. So, for example, if you buy a home, let's say, down the road, how can I plug in uh, insurance comparisons? How can I uh, link, gas, electric utilities to that experience that isn't related to the bank you're going to get the mortgage to?
Yeah.
And how do I ensure there's a constant stream of goods and services, and
Mm,
you only need one data point from the bank in order to access all of these kind of goods and services across the home buying ecosystem. Um, so that kind of brings a really interesting, proposition, which is, can the bank be front and center of building that platform ecosystem up, or will there be another non-financial player who can stitch that
yeah.
proposition together?
I actually find that comment really interesting because, and it's really kind of opened my eyes to how far this can go because you've talked about those really large expenditure items and then you touched on utilities. How far, where do we go with this? Does it go down to things like internet access? I imagine it could. But then also when you start to think about things like furniture, items for the house, carpets, paint, all those things that you might want to change, is that something that can be brought into that ecosystem as well?
Absolutely. It's already happening in the market already. So if you look at the UK at the moment, one of our big retail banks, TSB, have just partnered with a firm called ApTap. And ApTap, essentially, what it's there to do is help you manage goods and services that you have via subscription. It does the
Okay.
analytics in terms of what are you using, what can you compare in the market in order to get the same subscription with another firm,
Yeah.
and essentially starts with it's a very simple proposition of subscription management, and then just takes it to the next level and taps into product comparison and analytics around spending management. So if you look at that again through a home buyer's lens, you could find, continuous um, stream of services way after you've bought a mortgage with a bank.
Yeah, that's amazing. It really is. I guess my next question to you is, how does this benefit the customers and the banks?
So I'll start with customers first. So it's that word again, which is convenience. So if I start an entry point with, let's say, mortgages,
Yeah,
having that choice of different, I guess, connected products and services in one place just allows me to, quickly, set something up
yeah,
while without needing to rinse and repeat and fill out more forms to compare products when you go to like a
yeah.
comparison website, for example. And essentially, you can quickly get what you need, discount what you don't want, and also try out products very quickly. From a bank side, it's that whole classic, problem of how do I get access to more data in order
Yeah.
to build a 360 view of the customer.
Yeah.
Building a platform essentially allows a bank not just to get things like data from a purely transactional perspective, but how are customers using other non-financial products and services? How can I um, enhance that buying experience or provide more stuff? And it's a bit of a snowball effect, really. So as you get a better view of the customer, you can create new value propositions. You can
Of course.
create new experiences, which in turn rewards the customer with other things they might not get if they were to just buy standalone things.
Excellent. Thanks for that. So, obviously, you based in London. I'm in Australia at the moment. Have you seen, or have you got any insights in terms of what could be on the cards for Australia in the future?
Yeah, I guess kind of closer to home for you. A company you mentioned, WeChat, that are owned by Tencent. They have another, company called WeBank, which is essentially, a commercial marketplace specialist.
Yeah.
So WeBank have this really innovative way of pre-approving loans. So if you're part of that Tencent ecosystem as a
Yeah.
customer, WeBank is able to look at about 200 different social media and data points on the customer in order to
Wow.
pre-approve a loan. And if you look at kind of non-performing loans as a portfolio of their portfolio, I think it's only about 1.2%. And this could, be the future of seamless loans being, approved and seamless products and services being rolled out to a customer using non-financial data. And that's, really the power of the ecosystem there.
So we could talk. So are we talking about almost near instantaneous pre-approvals?
Absolutely. So instead of
Wow.
a customer journey that could be days or weeks here, we're talking, maybe hours in
Wow.
this case, if you as a customer meet the right criteria.
That's amazing. Is there anything else that we may see in the future?
So I think it's kind of the rise of super apps. It's been going on in the Far East for, you know, more than a decade now.
Yeah.
And Australia could be a nice bedrock in terms of tapping into.
Yeah.
So if the reason why WeChat and Grab in some of the Far East markets um, grew so quickly was just the fact that the vertical horizontals, like you say, weren't accessible to the
Yeah.
marketplace. So
Yeah.
if there's a one-stop shop for everyone, that's where you kind of get the lines blurring between uh, banking products and non-banking products.
Yeah. And we're kind of back to full circle with Musk again, and his attempts to conquering the world.
Exactly.
Excellent. I guess if you were to assist Elon Musk by offering him some advice in terms of how he'd set up what we both deem an almost impossible task. What would you say to him?
Very interesting question. Well, he certainly has ambitions with X.com, as he has had with
Yes.
other ventures in the past as well. But it's really about starting with something very basic and sounds very obvious, which is having a clear vision. So if you break his, big goal of being the biggest financial, institution in the world, what does that actually mean? What should he as a company tackle first? And what's the timelines to achieve this and the roadmap to achieve this? Second, and I think Twitter has had this in the past, is what's the monetization strategy behind this? So as he pivots away from just social media into, sounds like, embedded finance and other areas, how what's the value stream to create monetization behind this? A third, I'd say, is kind of focusing on the product rather than the technology. Twitter and X are a group of fantastic world-class engineers who are amazing what they do, but taking a step back and going, what is the data and the business aspect of this, and what are we trying to achieve? And I think fourth, and probably most importantly, is he won't be able to do this on his own. And the talent that Twitter have at the moment won't be able to do this on its own. You need a very clear partnership strategy. So who are you going to work with in order to achieve this? And how are you going to intrinsically bring that together and make sure the success, shared success, when it comes to the new venture into the future, really.
Thank you. So I guess one very, very quick question, because I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Do you think he'll succeed?
Maybe. If he listens to my advice, I'm sure he will, no doubt.
Let's have this chat again in a few months' time to see if there's been any progress. Well, Gana, I know you're incredibly busy, so I really appreciate you joining me today. It's been great chatting to you. And if in the near future you'd like to join me for another discussion about fintech and banking ecosystems, please don't hesitate to let me know.
Would love to. It's been great to chat with you, Jay. And let's see what we can talk about in the next one.
Sounds good. Excellent. Thank you ever so much, Gana, for your time.
Thank you.